As MH370 departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia, bound for Beijing, China, no one could have guessed that this routine flight would turn into one of the greatest, most gut-wrenching aviation puzzles of our time. It's been nearly a decade, and the circumstances surrounding the disappearance are still shrouded in mystery. But let's get through what we do know. On March 8, 2014, Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777-200ER, carrying 239 people, 227 passengers, and 12 crew members, left the airport on schedule. The plane taxied off and took flight without any hitches, and then the flight was successfully transferred from the airport's air traffic control to Lumpur Radar Air Traffic Control not long after takeoff. About 20 minutes into the journey, the aircraft made a routine transmission to traffic control. This transmission was actually an automated position report that was sent using the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. Unfortunately, what no one knew at the time was that this transmission would be the last made by the aircraft. A couple of minutes after the transmission, the captain sent a verbal signal to air traffic control, acknowledging the aircraft's transition from Lumpur Radar to the Ho Chi Minh Air Traffic Control. Again, no one knew that that would be the last time that anyone would hear the captain's voice, or the voice of anybody on that plane for that matter. Things quickly got worse after that. About 40 minutes into the journey, air traffic control lost contact with the aircraft. That is, the aircraft was no longer on primary radar, and because when it rains it pours, just a couple of minutes later, the flight couldn't be found on ATC secondary surveillance radar either. Of course, this was immediately a big issue. The captain on a different flight quickly tried to establish contact with the captain on the MH370. But while he was able to establish contact, he could only hear some mumblings and static. That didn't tell the authorities much. So other attempts were made to try and establish contact with the flight. All of them proved equally unsuccessful, even though they were all acknowledged by the plane's satellite data unit. However, through this loss of contact, the Malaysian military's primary radar system was still able to track the flight. So even though no one was able to establish contact with the flight, authorities were still able to determine where the plane was at that point. But it was obvious that the flight was in trouble because it was deviating from its planned flight path. And soon enough, even that small bit of hope was squashed. The Malaysian military's primary radar system lost track of the flight. Before the complete loss, though, the flight actually popped up on the radar of a number of other countries. Thailand and Vietnam, for instance, picked up the flight on their radar before things went off. In fact, Vietnam's Deputy Minister of Transport at the time mentioned that the country had notified Malaysian authorities twice about spotting MH370 on its radar. No idea whether anything was done about that. But at this point, the flight was well and truly lost, and the 239 people on board were all presumed dead. This made flight MH370 both the deadliest Malaysian Airlines flight and the deadliest flight involving a Boeing 777. Another record that this unfortunate flight set happened in the days following as search efforts started. While everyone on the plane was presumed dead, search efforts were launched to try and recover the ruins of the plane and the bodies of the departed. The initial search was focused on the South China Sea and Andaman Sea because that was where the secondary surveillance radar last detected the plane. Unfortunately, it yielded no wreckage or conclusive evidence, leaving the world perplexed and desperate for answers. But then the aircraft's automated communications were analyzed by satellite, and it was discovered that the plane's diversion had taken it in the direction of the Indian Ocean. So search efforts were redirected towards the Indian Ocean, which brought Australian authorities into the picture. As the Indian Ocean became a primary search site, Australian authorities assumed control of the search. Despite utilizing the most advanced technology available, including sonar mapping and underwater drones, the search proved immensely challenging. The vastness and depth of the ocean posed formidable obstacles, hindering progress and adding to the frustration and despair of families and investigators alike. On March 24, after it was determined that the plane's final destination was far from any possible landing site, the Malaysian government concluded that the flight had ended up in the southern Indian Ocean. However, this was not the end of the search. Efforts continued for years after that announcement, making the search for this flight the most expensive in aviation history. Unfortunately, all of that money, time, and effort has not resulted in the way of results. Some marine debris have been found through the years, and those pieces have been confirmed to be part of MH370. However, neither the bulk of the plane nor the bodies of the people have been found. It seems even nearly a decade later, like the plane with its occupants just disappeared off the face of the earth. In addition to the location of the plane still being a mystery, the reason for its disappearance is something else that nobody has been able to figure out. The plane was in good condition and had never been involved in any major accident. Its only minor accident happened when it was in taxi mode at Shanghai Pudong International Airport back in 2012. It only resulted in a broken wingtip. What's more, just a couple of months before the unfortunate flight, the plane had its routine maintenance A check. The plane was considered airworthy before it was flown, so everything was good. But even more curious is the fact that before the flight lost communication, there was no distress signal, technical problems, or any indication of bad weather. None of the crew members called air traffic for help. The plane literally just disappeared all of a sudden. Considering those weird circumstances, there have been lots of theories as to what could have been the reason for the disappearance. Some theories propose mechanical failure or pilot error, while others suggest a hijacking or terrorism. The speculation expanded to include theories of intentional diversion, remote control takeover, or even the possibility of extraterrestrial intervention. And really, when the circumstances are as suspicious as that, it's understandable how wild these theories can be. Some of these theories have been explored officially, though. For instance, the hijacking and intentional diversion theories were investigated. There were 2 passengers on the flight that had stolen passports. Both of them were investigated, but eventually dismissed as suspects. Every other person on that flight was dismissed as suspects as well, aside from the captain. The captain remained a prime suspect if human intervention was eventually proven to be the cause of the disappearance. His records as a Malaysian Airlines pilot are certainly clean. In fact, he had been both a type rating instructor and type rating examiner since 2007. So his records were not what made him a suspect. It's the fact that nothing else makes sense. The plane was in good condition. No one called air traffic control to report any issue, and later investigators actually showed that after the initial diversion, the plane was flown for 6 continuous hours without any other diversions until it ran out of fuel. We're not investigators, but it does sound like if there's something nefarious involved, it has to have been an inside job. And with every other person on the plane cleared of suspicion, the captain does seem like the most likely suspect. That said, there was something peculiar about the captain picked up years later during investigations. The FBI found that on his flight simulator, he had flown a flight plan that was similar to the route that the disappeared flight was projected to have flown after its diversion. The finding was suppressed by Malaysian authorities, and it said they must have done it because they refused to believe that their pilots could have intentionally crashed a plane full of passengers. Anyway, nobody on that flight has been spotted since the day of the disappearance. And while the captain is a suspect, there's nothing to say that a crime was actually committed. And even if there was, there's no hard evidence linking him to it. Unfortunately, the grieving families of the passengers and crew have endured years of uncertainty and heartache, their lives forever altered by the mysterious surrounding of the flight's disappearance. It's been close to a decade since that disappearance, and they are nowhere close to getting closure. A few weeks after the crash, there were some reported sightings. One fisherman claimed to have seen an aircraft off the coast of Kota Baru. And what was weird about that, it was flying unusually low. Not long after, an oil rig worker mentioned having seen a burning object in the sky. All of these sightings were in the Maldives, by the way, and none of them have turned up anything concrete. In addition to the tragedy that it brought, it was obvious there were serious limits to the reach and effectiveness of aircraft tracking and flight recorders. This prompted significant reforms in the aviation industry, particularly in regards to tracking and communication systems. For instance, the International Civil Aviation Organization introduced new regulations requiring aircraft positions to be reported when aircrafts are over open sea. In addition, the ICAO extended recording time for cockpit voice recorders, and new aircrafts now need to make sure that flight recorders are recoverable before they sink into water. Of course, these reforms and new regulations cannot bring back those that seem forever lost. But at the very least, the tragedy of MH370 has become a catalyst for positive change, emphasizing the importance of safety and accountability in the skies. The new reforms and regulations were not introduced to prevent crashes, but to prevent disappearances, and so far, they seem to be working. Thanks again for watching. If you like stories like these, make sure to subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.